just to classify the two types of digital property we're talking about at the moment, there's digital assets, which Perry Ann represents. We're talking things about Bitcoin and Ethereum. This is pretty new. And then we have data assets. But jumping off of what Mr. Kennedy just said, Perry Ann, I wanted to start with you. What is wrong with the current framework that we have in digital asset ownership?
Yeah, well, I think Bobby did a great job of really highlighting what the problems are and what's at stake just as Americans and people. Ownership and control of your assets, whatever type of asset it is, your money, your data, your intellectual property, the ownership of things like your car, all of these today in the digital world, up until the invention of Bitcoin and blockchain technology, you couldn't control in the digital world. So Mr. Kennedy's, or actually you started the conversation off by saying we're 30 years into the commercial internet. The internet was a technology that allows us to communicate. It's ultimately a communications protocol. It was created in a program called DARPA, and it was originally used for communication for the military to use in the event of a nuclear war. That was the purpose of what became the internet. It's a way to communicate. So we can send a message like an email, peer-to-peer, without having to go through a third party like the post office to send our message, which has completely changed the way the entire media operates. It's completely revolutionized many different industries. Where the internet stops is the transfer and the ownership of an asset. So if I'm going to send you money peer-to-peer, how do I send you $1 directly without going through a third party like a bank in a digital world? You can't. That's what Bitcoin is. That is the invention of Bitcoin. That was the technological advancement of the introduction of Bitcoin. That's why it's such a big deal. I can send money or digital data that's in my ownership, and I can send it to you directly without having to go through a third party. It's a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So what does that mean? That means that your digital asset is a bearer instrument. So Bitcoin was the first digital bearer instrument. What's a bearer instrument? He who holds it owns it. So if I have a dollar bill, if it's in my hand, it's mine. Christian, if I give it to you, this is our invisible dollar bill. He who holds it owns it. It's yours. So the invention of Bitcoin allows for digital property rights for the first time in history, which means you not only own your asset, you control your asset. So much of our data today, it may be owned by us, but we don't control it. It's not in our control. It's in the control of a third party. That's why this technology is so important. It solved a decades-old computer science dilemma called the double spend problem. And that's where it's all stemming from, and it might stem a revolution.
The point that I love that you made is that yes, we're 30 years in, but there was never a currency made for the internet. We've been operating for 30 years using old payment rails, old institutions for the internet, which is borderless, permissionless, cross boundaries. So we don't have a native currency, and that's part of what Bitcoin did. But it gets you start thinking, it's like it's moved so quickly over the last 30 years. I'm old enough to remember dial-up, and I don't think that I'm that old. But we went from dial-up to Facebook on your mobile phone really, really quickly. And so the idea is we have a lot to think through here. We've been so focused on tech, but the policy and the legislation really doesn't protect a lot of what we want to be able to do on the internet. And so there's a couple things I want to double click on, but let's talk about, right now we can all own digital assets. We're allowed to own Bitcoin. We're still allowed to mine it, participate in the network. What are we not allowed to do that we need to be able to do in digital assets, and what's being proposed? Is there anything stopping our ability to participate in Bitcoin and in other digital asset networks?
Well, Mr. Kennedy mentioned a piece of legislation that's been sponsored by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Roger Marshall. and it's called the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act, or S2669. This bill is currently pending in the U.S. Senate. It is a bill that was introduced under the guise of illicit finance, but it's actually a backdoor ban on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. It would make it impossible to use this technology in a legally compliant way if this bill were to be enacted. So it is a backdoor. It's effectively a ban on the use of cryptocurrency in the United States. This bill has 19 co-sponsors on it. So roughly 20% of the U.S. Senate today is on record of the position of restricting Americans' access to an open source technology. This would have devastating implications, not only for our constitutional rights, including property rights and digital property rights, but would be absolutely devastating to the future of the crypto economy in the United States. This bill, although it's a crypto, it's a Bitcoin bill, but it's much bigger than that. So if the government can start with this, small nascent technology ecosystem and preventing our access to digital assets through this bill, what's next? I think this is a very slippery slope, and all Americans should be invested in this conversation to stop any effort to restrict Americans' access to open source technologies to make sure the United States can continue to be the center of the free world.
That's awesome. And then to bring up something else you said, the bearer instrument. So when I own my Bitcoin, I see that as being like the Trojan horse that kind of breaks down, that gets into the system. If I have the ability to digitally own something, and maybe you can talk to how that actually is achieved, that opens the way for owning other assets that aren't quite totally classified yet, like data assets, like the data that I'm generating throughout my day, driving my car, my phone, my laptop, everything with a sensor in it. I see these as potentially data assets. We're not as clear about how to define that yet, but what it seems like Bitcoin did was allow for us to own any digital asset, period.
Own and control.
Own and control. So is that the way you see it as well? Like if we can get policy and regulators on board with this, it opens the floodgates for a lot of other types of data assets that we can also have ownership and control over.
Yeah, well, Bitcoin being the first digital bearer instrument, there's a range of applications we can use with blockchain technology, so we can put ownership and control of other types of digital assets beyond Bitcoin in the hands of Americans. So, for example, today there's a number of examples of marriages being hashed into the Bitcoin blockchain. So you can own and control that record. We see a future where all assets, real world assets, are represented by a digital twin or a digital token issued on a blockchain. So for example, if you're an artist and you've created a painting, you have a physical painting, but then you have another token that is that digital twin that you also own in the digital world that represents a physical asset. Any asset could go on chain. This could be stocks, securities, equities. This could be the title to your car, the title to your house. Gold. We have tokenized gold. There's tokenized diamonds that are represented on chain, and I think this could go to all of our data as well, putting that representing it on a blockchain, so you own and you can control and take ownership and control of digital assets in the digital world, which today we largely rely on third parties for.
That's really exciting. It's really exciting to me. I think I learned recently that there's 4,000 companies in the US alone whose sole business model is buying and selling data. And it's something like just under a $400 billion industry. So that happened quickly, it seemed to me. I didn't think that I was sharing anything of value a few years ago, but it turns out that's not the case. So Ed, you're our inside guy coming from the State Department. Talk to us a little bit about why senators or politicians, bureaucrats, legislators may or may not like this trend, and how do we get this across the goal line? How do we allow people to actually own digital assets, and what are we up against?
I think the best way to answer that is to talk about a real world example. And I'm going to refer to the People's Republic of China. And when I do, I'm not referring to the people of China. I'm referring to the leaders, the rulers, if you will, the Communist Party of China. So they have what's called the social credit score. And
just closer, I think.
Okay. They have a social credit score, and they track everything. They track everything you do. They have cameras everywhere. And your score on that credit score affects what you're able to do. So, for example, if you do something that's not permitted or not allowed, you may not be able to travel. You may not be able to travel outside of the city that you live in. It's just a fact of life. And the people that live there may not like it. They can't be negative about it. They have to live within it. And I'll give you one example that when I was at the State Department, that I really kind of blew my mind, is they dictated at one point that you needed to go and see your grandparents X number of times every quarter or a month. Well, that's a nice thing, actually. I think that would be good to see your grandparents. But the government is demanding that and telling you have to do that. And if you don't, then you're going to go lower on the social credit score and you'll lose rights. That's very intrusive in your life. And that's, to me, an example of where the government wants to control what you do. You may totally love your grandparents and see them every day, but the government telling you that you have to do that for a minimum amount of time, it's really controlling your life. And that's just one example. So I think that's when we think about what Senator Warren might want to do, or anybody else, or 20% of the Senate, in a way what they really want to do is control our lives. The more they can see what we're doing, the more they can control their lives.
On the China example, so the social credit score program has been around for a while. I have a friend that went and studied at Tsinghua University, and they were jaywalking. They got caught jaywalking because they surveil everything you do at this point. And there was money that was deducted from their bank account automatically for jaywalking. So let's just take this one step further. China has introduced a central bank digital currency. They were the first country in the world to implement a CBDC, the digital yuan. They're layering the CBDC, their digital yuan, with the social scoring program. So not only are they watching what you're doing in the physical world, it's linked to your money. And if they don't like what you're doing, they can just remove you. In fact, this is what happened to the Canadian truckers who were protesting, the whole vaccine situation, and these people were they lost their bank accounts. So if you don't have access to money, to your bank account, to the central bank digital currency, how do you pay your rent? How do you buy food? How do you provide for your family? You can't. It's a death sentence. What about, going and seeing your grandparents? Great. I definitely support spending time with your family. What if the political regime that's in charge doesn't believe in the right in LGBT rights? And what if you attend an LGBT event? Can they just cut you off? What if it's if they discriminate against your religion and you buy a Bible? Can they just remove you from the financial system? So these are the types of things as Americans we should be absolutely vigilant against. And it certainly wouldn't be okay here in the United States, but this is ultimately what's at risk.
TAO of Data.